Pioneer Dominique Reynolds. After hours of trekking through the progressively denser jungle, even having to cut down walls of trees to continue forward, we came across a clearing featuring a concrete square in the center, with a metal track leading off to a massive circular vault door in the side of a cliff face. This must have been the cargo drop-off and transportation system. The door didn't have any external access features, it was just a flat steel disc embedded deep into the rock. Any scans I made simply bounced back. The entire area must have shielding, meaning we would be going in blind. Avalon decided to take this opportunity to tell me things that I already knew. Dominique, the facility is entirely enclosed. I won't be able to reach you as long as you are in there. Yeah, good riddance. Well, Doc, here we are. Are you ready to be a hero? Dokara had an uneasy attitude, gripping his stolen rifle tightly and never standing still. He'd been getting progressively anxious as we approached the destination. I had chalked it up to him getting stage fright after trying to reach this moment for so long, but I wasn't a xenopsychologist by any stretch. I couldn't have him freaking out on me when we were in there. I don't know what we're going to find in there, Dom, but we made an agreement. No Grat is leaving alive, right? I walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder, getting him to face me directly for the first time in a while. Looking into his eyes, I realized that the behavior I'd been seeing in him wasn't stress or apprehensiveness. It was eagerness. A fire was raging in him, and he wanted to burn people with it. It wasn't my position to intervene in his revenge. All right, I get it, Doc. Camera's off for this one. Walking back towards the vault door, I began about gaining access the good old-fashioned way. I placed my hands at the seams of the door and started wriggling my fingers through, trying to get a good hold on the other side. 5, 10, 15 inches of pure steel before reaching the other side, needing to prop myself on the stone wall to actually pull the door out instead of embedding myself into it. Popping the seal, I was met with a cold draft and a diagonal open elevator shaft with minimal lighting, just enough to see the edge of the platform. Going by the lack of railings, it seems like the architects of this place weren't too worried with safety conventions. The elevator was inoperable from here, so we instead went over the edge and started sliding down the shaft, our path illuminated by the light fixtures attached to our guns. The lack of guards so far was strange, but I suppose that there were no defensible positions in the entryway for them to be stationed at. The shaft ended at a large concrete hallway with only a pair of metal doors at the end, and that same track stretching across the length of it. From the little that I could see, behind the doors was a massive room that I couldn't scan the end of, likely our goal. After exchanging nods with Dokara, I gave the doors a hearty kick, blowing them off the hinges and revealing a gargantuan metal chamber similar to a city block in length and width, while only reaching around 20 feet in height. The room was completely filled with a grid of massive metal tubes coming up from the ground, about 2 feet in radius and 10 feet in height. The roof was lined with tracks for a giant crane arm which was currently idle in a corner. The dotted strips of light across the floor cast a sickly green glow over the entire area. Straight ahead were 2 Gratonians in white lab coats near a large terminal jutting from the floor. Before they even had the chance to turn around, Dokara was already letting rounds loose, turning their heads into fine murals of crimson on the tubes ahead of them. As for the guards in the room, none. It's like they weren't even aware that we had broken through the entrance. I could see a few doors dotted around the perimeter of the room, but the tubes offered plenty of cover if anyone came rushing through. I walked over to the terminal and wiped off the slurry with a generously provided lab coat before getting to work. The interface was pretty straightforward, a grid of blue circles with a few missing at the bottom, denoting our current location in relation to the display. I pressed on one of the circles near us and heard a mechanical whirring come to life from below me before the tube to my left started descending into the ground, revealing another glass tube hidden by the metal covering. What was contained in the tube had a generally humanoid shape. I was able to make out where the arms and legs were, but the familiarity ended there. Swells of exposed flesh cascaded over each other in recursion, melding the limbs together and smothering any features originally borne by the body. Patterned gashes exposed ingrown bones covered in twisted spurs, the wounds seemingly forgotten and deemed unworthy of recovery. Where joints would have normally been, sickly yellow protrusions of bone and tough cartilage pierced the surface and snaked out, colliding with other parts of the mass and perpetually tearing chunks of sore flesh out. An array of plastic tubes started from the bottom of the tube and disappeared into the being suspended in liquid, some of them injecting a green liquid and others receiving a red one. It was the blood of this person, the entire product of this operation. Shh, what the fuck is this? Envelope disease. That caused me to spin towards Dokara. He had a blank expression on his face, his gun hanging on his side and shoulders slouched. I couldn't get a read on him, but was that really necessary in this scenario? It was the leading cause of death for our people before we developed a cure, but I've never seen it this bad. I stepped back and looked around the room before looking back at the terminal. There were thousands of these tubes. Were they all filled with people that looked like this? Doc, these people still have vital signs. Maybe they could be saved. I heard a clattering behind me. Dokara had dropped his gun and fell down to his knees, hugging himself and speaking between short breaths. You don't get it, Dom. The brain is the first thing to go. These aren't people anymore, they're machines. There had to be something here, something we could do. The recent shipment. If this is a disease, those people probably are still fine. I just needed to find out which tubes they were in. Looking through the message logs, the most recent is 1 week ago. LC 13-2. The floor is overcrowded, expansion is still under construction. We don't have accommodations for the new assets. OVS 13. There was a logistical error. Take the excess assets to the butcher for liquidation. Make sure not to let anything go to waste. Demand is high at the moment. Dokara had been in a nearly catatonic state, barely cognizant of my presence even when I was trying to pull him up to his feet. I needed to explore the rest of the facility and clear out possible hostiles, but I couldn't leave him alone in this state and under the risk of being attacked. He'd entered this place with a burning soul, the subject of his hope seemingly right at the tips of his fingers, only to learn that there was nobody out there waiting for him to save them. I walked through the weakly lit concrete hallways, discovering nothing of great interest. Storage rooms filled with every flavor of caustic solutions, offices detailing the sparse records of the nameless facility's outside interactions, dreary sleeping quarters, and living accommodations. Despite the apparent capacity for employees that the facility featured, we never ran into any opposition. Dokara was slowly trudging behind me through all of this, seemingly indifferent to the mundane discoveries we made and trapped in his own thoughts. Oftentimes, he would stop in his tracks, face completely devoid of expression. I had to physically jolt him out of his stupor to get him to keep walking. I myself had not properly registered the things I had seen in that room just yet. After witnessing thousands of people robbed of their existence, not a modicum of hope left to cling on to, nor a mind with which to do so, my mind began to lock itself down. Just as I could think much faster than any organic equipment, I could also force myself to process at a sedated rate. There was a dam in my mind with the intent of keeping emotions at bay, but it was slowly forming cracks along its surface. I do not know the nature of what that dam is impeding, nor do I know what will happen when it finally collapses. While searching through a hallway that featured the railing that ran through some parts of the facility, we came across the processing room. Glass pipes filled with blood swarmed the walls like a crimson web, all converging to a nozzle on the ceiling that was perched over the enormous industrial centrifuge in the center of the room. The combined volume of liquid contained in those vials was enough to fill an Olympic pool. We'd come in right before the last vial had been topped off, witnessing the automated procedure enter its final phase. Neither of us moved to stop it from acting out. The blood had already been drawn, its source incapable of even recognizing its absence. We watched for 20 minutes, simply standing there as the liquids slowly developed a split in color. At the end of the spin cycle, the results were drained and filtered, undergoing various chemical reactions to split out the desired medicine from its accompaniments. A small bottle of glasses, about the same length and width of a human thumb, was filled with a clear liquid and presented to us on a small, extending platform as if to mock us with its existence. A small voice rang out from beside me, unsure if it was on the brink of laughing or crying. I want to be left alone. I traced my way back through the halls, the only thing accompanying me being the sounds of my steps echoing around me. The walls waved ahead of me, threatening to twist and bend before collapsing and locking me in. I tried to grab a wall to steady myself, and nearly fell face first onto the ground from misjudging the distance. The shadows cast by the dim lights dotting the floors danced on the ceiling, causing me to trip when looking up at them. They looked wrong. I climbed back up the shaft and over the elevator platform, receiving a sensory overload once reaching outside. After being in a dim place for so long, the light of the midday sun beaming through the clearing assaulted me before I could readjust my eyes. Organized static beamed into my head from far above, overtaking my sense of hearing and derailing any thoughts I harbored. A message from that sentient. "Dominique, I've been trying to reach you. You've been complete." So loud. But that audio static didn't go away after shutting him out. There was something else, equally loud, begging for my attention. I was completely surrounded by Gratonians. They were on the ground, in the trees, on flying vehicles, all armed with heavy weaponry. There was one closer than all the rest, their voice amplified by a device in their hand, yelling words at me that I just couldn't quite grasp. I want to shut it up. My hands were around its head in an instant, lifting it up to my height so I could make direct eye contact. It struggled and squirmed, beating on my arms and kicking my chest in pretentious defiance, its eyes conveying a panicked anger. It couldn't speak anymore, my grasp holding its mouth shut, but it still vocalized growls and grunts. I was vaguely aware of being peppered with bullets, but they seemed to be holding back on the more potent weaponry. "Do you even understand what you are defending? Has anyone bothered to tell you the cost of your lazy greed?" The Grat's eyes took on a look of fear, fully realizing the situation that it was in. Its struggling became more frantic, the punches and kicks coming in higher frequency. It pleaded in desperation, letting out cries like a baby goat would, waving its arms in an attempt to have someone save it. My fingers started to tear into the skin. It tried prying my hands away, unable to get a good grip due to its own blood. My fingers sank deeper, eliciting a slow crunch to sound out. It placed its arms between mine, attempting to slow the process, like an ant pushing against a mountain, pushing, pulling, scratching, screaming, and then collapse. Its eyes squeezed out, the ears and nose expelling blood that had nowhere else to go. Integrity failed. Resistance ceased entirely, the disgusting squelching of spongy meat in a vise. A headless body hangs by its hands, still holding onto my arms. The entire jungle seemed to stand still for a moment, everyone silently processing what had just happened. I was already upon another. I swung my arm, separating the head and shoulder from the rest of the body. How could beings so frail inflict so much cruelty? Their heavy weapons couldn't be turned towards me fast enough, their explosive ordnance not concentrated enough to slow me. I uprooted trees, removing the dwellers from their perches, and used them to ground the flying vehicles. My actions were blurry to me, my mind was still intentionally dulled, and my senses were blocked from most input. I had to stop. My body had taken constant abuse and needed a minute of downtime. There was a smattering of Grats running away in the distance, but they were inconsequential by now. Liquid pooled all around me, held in puddles by thick tree roots and the saturated mud that was the jungle floor. It flowed in channels to small reservoirs that reached up to my ankles, which overflowed and spilled thanks to my disturbance. I'd been unknowingly following the streams, leading me back to the entrance of the facility just to see Dokchara emerging from the entrance, leaving behind the now burning hallways and chambers.